Falling. Not something we have to worry about with gliders and mounts. But they are not always around to save us. So now that I'm falling for real, it is a good time to think about fall damage. Maybe there's a way out. I've been testing falling for some time now and even made a short video about it. Mostly to get a high number, but there were some odd things about the numbers. Some discrepancies that left me with some questions. Let's try to answer them in the hope of not getting more questions. I make a lot of assumptions in this video. Be a little skeptic and don't hesitate to correct me in the comments. Interesting. Here are some questions I've compiled to start us off. How much damage do we get at a certain height? The wiki has a graph, but it's a bit wobbly. Curious to why that is. Does total distance matter, or just height? Does distance traveled matter? Falling damage isn't the most consistent. Maybe traveling in the horizontal direction as well as the vertical direction has an influence on it. Does falling speed influence falling damage? And does time in the air influence falling damage? Before we start with the testing, what do we already know about falling damage? Not every drop results in shattered kneecaps. We need some height before we feel the effects of gravity. We'll have to find out the distance we don't take damage and the maximum height that is still safe to walk away from. Let me add those to the question board. What is the height we start taking damage? And what is the height we start taking lethal damage? Back to the facts. Landing in water is a safe way to land without taking damage. But how much water do we need? Just a puddle isn't enough, but not every place has a convenient lake to dip into. Also some good questions to add to the question board. How much water is necessary for a safe landing? Does height matter for landing safely in water? Does speed matter for landing safely in water? To properly answer these questions, we need a place where we can dictate the playing field. Play around with different heights to a pixel perfect level. That place? The guild halls, obviously. This is a great sandbox where you can place many different decorations of different sizes and in specific locations. Now that we have our testing site, we can use it to solve the mystery of falling damage. Starting with probably the most important factor, not taking falling damage at all. Once falling from a great height, there are two ways to not take damage. We can reset our falling speed in midair. The most common method is to open and close your glider. Another is with teleports, with the best example being the Jackal mount. But other more obscure teleports also exist. The second way to prevent falling damage is to land in water. I've made this configuration of platforms just below the water surface. If I jump from this height, I splat on the left platform, but safely land in the water on the right. You can probably tell what the trigger is for surviving if I run, or rather swim, around on the platform. Now, let's get a bit higher and do the same experiment. Nope, height is not a factor. Time to increase our speed. But how would we increase our speed? When you fall normally, you reach terminal velocity after half a second. After that you move at around 1000 range per second and no faster. There have been ways to bypass this limit in the past, but I can't seem to recreate those. Except with two methods, which are both available in the guild hall. One is the Oak Essence Pool, which accelerates towards the ground if you miss your landing. Downside is that you won't receive any falling damage. Well, I guess that's usually an upside. The other method acts the same, but also gives falling damage. Nova launch from the fractal console. Using it is a bit tricky though. Here I use a little trick, where if you remove a decoration you are standing on, you still have an invisible space to stand. This disappears the moment you move or teleport. The great thing is that you can still use point-blank targeting while hovering over your UI. With this trick, I can use the Nova launch from the fractal console to give myself uncapped falling speed acceleration. Well, there you have it. In theory, if you happen to fall like a meteor from the sky, as long as there's enough surface water to swim in, you can walk away from any fall unscathed. For the remaining questions on our board, we are a bit limited in our current Kenta base. I desire some more space. What do I mean by this? Each map, with probably a few exceptions, is built with a water layer as a base. This means that if you find a body of water, it will be on the same height as all the other water you find in a map. They try to mask it sometimes with fake water, but you can never swim in that. You will be able to spot fake water now that you know. Although with the launch of Secrets of the Obscure, they managed to actually make water pools above the usual layer. That said, each of the maps still has a water layer at the very bottom. Since water stops our fall, the lowest point in the map we currently care about is the water layer. The highest point is the skybox. There are two ceilings on a map. One is the no-fly zone. If you dismount from your favorite mount in this zone, you will be teleported to the spot you mounted up that is outside of this zone. Just above the zone is the skybox. You can't physically bypass this barrier, and if you do try really hard, you will be teleported to the ground. So for our big tower, we want the guild hall with the biggest distance between the water layer and the skybox. Let's line them up. The ranged method I used is not perfect, but it is clear that Sandswept Haven is the winner. The questions best to tackle next are the ones that answer what contributes to the falling damage number. With that knowledge, we can more accurately figure out the falling damage formula. I'm planning to fall down in 3 different ways and faceplant in the exact same spot. Straight down, one try falling in a spiral, and another try going forward and then back. And since we're here anyways, I also want to try a 4th way. Here we measure not the distance traveled, but the distance between last point of contact and point of impact. I fall down in the water, but this time much further away. 40,475 range away, according to the minimap. Now, for some audience participation. Which method will give us significantly more falling damage? Is it A, only vertical distance matters? B, the distance traveled while in the air contributes most? C, the horizontal deviation is most important? Or D, the total horizontal and vertical distance is what matters? Lock in your answers and bam! Well, there is basically no difference between A, B and C. The higher damage in D is most likely from falling further in the water. If the horizontal distance from start and end would matter, it's negligible. Good to know. This means only vertical damage matters. However, just to be on the safe side, in all my future tests, I will be dropping straight down with hands off the keyboard and mouse. But distance isn't the only variable we can alter. We've already learned we can use Nova Launch from the Fractal console. This will both increase our speed and decrease our time in the air. Also from the Fractal console is low gravity. This does not decrease our speed, but does give us a way to increase the time in the air by having a very slow jump at the start. Since there isn't a reliable way to hang in the air, this is the best method to increase our air time. 3 jumps, 1 natural fall, 1 fast fall, and 1 slow fall. Because Nova Launch and low gravity start with a jump, I also jump on the natural fall. And the result is, well, the numbers are so similar that the difference can be explained by the height difference of the start jump. This means that most likely speed and airtime are irrelevant. We can't rule out that speed and airtime, however unlikely, aren't unrelated, and just so happen to add up to roughly the same number in the fall damage calculation. But we'll just assume they don't matter. Both these last two tests can be summarized as: only the vertical distance from the top of your freefall to the end matters when it comes to taking falling damage. Another good thing to note now is gravity is fair. It hits everyone equally, not in amount of damage, but in percentual damage. Someone with 10,000 health and 20,000 health take different amounts of damage, but lose 10% of health from this drop. With all this knowledge in our back pocket, we can start to answer our last remaining questions, starting with: from which height do you start taking falling damage, and from which height do you take lethal falling damage? These two platforms are pixels away, but on the left one we don't take damage, and on the right we take 1000 damage, which means that we take 10% of our hit points damage at a minimum. The heights are 489 for no damage and 490 for damage. For the max, again, two platforms pixels away. The left we survive with just 2 health, and on the left we shatter our kneecaps. The difference this time is nothing, but I suspect that is because of how numbers are rounded. This means that somewhere between 1289 and 1290 range is death. Finally, it's time for the big question. How much damage do we take from a certain height? To help make a solid dataset, we can find plenty of decorations that can be used as a measurement. My choice are these snow cubes that are approximately 300 range in each direction. As for floors, I'm using these wooden beetle racing tracks. They are made for building a smooth road, and as such are placed at the exact height as your current decoration. Also, I'm assuming they are perfectly flat, but I could be wrong on that. Stacking these, I can make a tower with floors that are the same distance apart for the best measurement. Although not necessary, it's best if we can build as high as possible for more data points. This reminds me of something. Alright, let's Fortnite this up.
I'm a cool pro Fortnite gamer. Cool pro Fortnite. Take me to your Xbox to play Fortnite today. You can take me Moisty Mire, but not Loot Lake. I really love to chug jug with you. We can be pro Fortnite gamers. La 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 yeah. La 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 yeah. La, la.
Welcome to the top. We're now almost 40,000 ranged up in the air. Enough for a good 130-ish drops. For the tests, I'm using a character with exactly 10,000 health. This way, the damage should be representative of the percent damage it should do per 300 range increments. Oops. To have the same drop every time without uncertainties like jumping and moving, I'm using the same decoration gimmick as when testing with the Nova launch earlier. Here I removed the decoration underneath my feet. As long as I don't move or jump, the game considers me still on the platform. Using Shadow Step aimed at my feet, the invisible platform disappears and I will start falling. Enough talk, let's get some data points. Analysis time. There are a few things to note before I whip out the graphs. The numbers aren't perfectly round. My hope was that the 300 range gap and the perfect 10,000 health would result in some nice numbers. But that's not the case. It probably has to do with the second observation that there were only 129 drops. If we take the height from earlier and divide it by 300, we should get 132 drops. This means that the distance between each drop is probably a little over 300. Not that it matters, as long as each distance is the same. We can add the true height later. With that out of the way, it's graph time. This is the damage we took per drop. It's a clear quadratic curve. It looks smooth too, but looks can be deceiving. let's dive a bit deeper by looking at the difference in damage between each drop. Whoa, what's up with that spike? It seems drop 54, for some reason, was shorter than the rest and 55 was at the height it should be. Which is weird, as placing a block out of place is something that couldn't have happened the way I built the tower. Looking back at the footage, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So let's cut out this outlier for now. With the spike gone, we can see that the increase in damage per drop is linear, which means that the curve from earlier is indeed quadratic. However, there's still something weird going on. The line isn't perfectly flat. It shouldn't happen, as our falls were all of the same length with the same health. Let's dive even deeper by looking at the differences of the differences. Oh, there is that spike again. Let me cut that out. Aha! My suspicions were correct. The damage isn't uniform. How could that have happened? I can think of two things. The first one is that the snow cubes I used as a measuring stick aren't perfectly flat, and thus each raceway is not placed at the same height. While plausible, the differences in damage are quite big, so I'm leaning more towards the second explanation. But to illustrate that one, let's look at some other graphs first. I also tracked the time it took to fall down. Counting the frames at 60 frames per second, from shadow step activation to loss of life, we get the time per drop. I recorded one drop only halfway, so that one is cut out. Like with the second graph, this one also isn't perfectly straight. Well, it should be. Let's dive a bit deeper in this one as well and look at the differences. Oops, let me correct the missing drop. It's fluctuating quite badly. How weird. Looking at this graph made me look at each aspect of a drop. First is the shadow step. Well, those are the same on all the drops. The fall itself also isn't a factor, as I was hands off the keyboard after the shadow step. That leaves the landing. Let's look at two landings side by side. Drops 117 and 118. We can't see them falling until they hit the platform. Now something interesting happens. The camera keeps on falling while the character stops. On the right, she already takes damage, while on the left, the game takes a few more frames to realize she has landed. Using this as an explanation, I believe the game checks every so often if you have landed or not. And it tries to predict where you would have fallen, hence the still moving camera. It's just a few frames, but enough to make my experiment almost a failure. I probably should have fallen more times per drop to counteract this effect. But I don't really feel like doing all
Excellent.
of that.
There are few things more satisfying than a foolproof sample size.
Dang it, Gorrik. But you're right. So I did it again. And again. And again. And again. And... no, just 4 times. But that should suffice. Same formula as before, but the third and fourth drop set started about 50 range higher than the first and the second. I also made sure to hover over the commander tag on the minimap while falling to get an accurate estimate of the distance. After building the second tower, I noticed I ended up a bit lower than the tower of the previous dataset. This does confirm our previous suspicion that the snow blocks or the race pieces aren't perfectly flat. Hopefully the larger dataset will help and straighten the differences. Now let's see the graphs. Looks fine so far. Let's see the difference of damage compared to each drop. Oh no, there are the spikes again. Weirdly, they are not on the same drop. So it's not a problem with the tower. With the outliers gone, it looks fine enough, but as with our first set, looks are deceiving. The difference of the difference looks stable enough when the outliers are skewing the scale. With the outliers gone, it's visible how irregular the damage is. Same story with the time taken to drop down. Only here there are no outliers. so the weird behavior is not tied to the time in the air. Honestly, I'm a bit at a loss here. I don't know why there are outliers. Why the numbers are so irregular, or why the time in the air isn't closer together. Especially knowing that I measured the speed at 17 rads per frame makes the time difference pretty impactful. Regardless, I still want to have a formula for how much damage we take from each height. Looking at the data, a quadratic formula is expected. To get this quadratic curve, I placed the dataset into Desmos, an online graphing calculator. From a distance, it again looks fine. But when we take a closer look, the green dataset seems to be deviating from the others. Which is super weird, as all drops were done on the same tower. So green and red should be the same dots. When we graph a quadratic expression, we can see that for red, blue and yellow, the lines are practically the same. So if I were to give a formula for fall damage, I would give the curve that uses those three sets. But that's not very neat, so I'm going to do it again, but through a different approach. Here I'm going to find the height where each of the thousands occur. As I can't be entirely sure, I'm going to try to pick a lower and upper bound with their heights. When pasting them in Desmos, something wacky happens. The corresponding quadratic expression to our new set almost overlaps with the green set. I'm super confused, but there you have it. Well, that's the best I've got. Maybe someone with more of a math background can get a better approximation. All my data is in the video description. With the damage formulas, we've answered all the questions we've asked originally, but there are 3 more we've gained from all the drop sets. What's up with those? Let's organize everything we know. There were a ton of drops. At the end, it became clear that although the differences in distance between each floor was 1 range at most, the differences in damage and time was more intense than expected. There were also a few drops that for some reason received less damage than they should have, according to the data. We know that the only factor that should matter for fall damage is the vertical distance. Speed and time in the air are irrelevant. The impact with the ground can have a delay. After half a second, terminal velocity is reached at 1020 ranged per second. This information is contradictory. Speed and airtime are irrelevant, and height is the only factor for damage calculation, are both fighting with differences of height are marginal, time is all over the place, and the terminal velocity. I'm missing something, but I have a hunch related to the remaining clues. The outliers and the delay on impact. With those suspicious clues, I have a hypothesis. Lag. Yes, it may have been very obvious to some of you, but my brain took a while to make this connection. I found a simple program online that can simulate lag and more, and tried a few drops from the same height. And the results? Well, sometimes I took a little bit more damage than expected, and some very dubious things happened after. But all the damage was still around the expected value of just survivable. So, unless I didn't use the program correctly, which is very plausible, it isn't lag. Half the clues are contradictory, and the other half lead to a dead end. I managed to answer all of our original questions, but we're still left with new, arguably more difficult, questions. I'm at a loss. Time to shelve this project and have an intern look at it at a later date.